Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Simone here, and today I'm going to be doing my December wrap up. So this will be all of the books that I read in the month of December. I actually read 14 books in December, which was great. It was my first Wheel of TBR video that I did in December, so I'll link that down below so you can see why I picked out some of the books. I'm not going to go into what they were for or anything in this video, but just go and check that one out. Also, if you watched my January Wheel of TBR, you'll have seen how I did and which ones I actually read. Also, you'll see in this video as well. Mostly this month, on top of the Wheel of TBR, I also participated in the magical readathon, so a lot of the prompts or the books that I read extra to the Wheel of TBR was because of that, so I will talk about the prompts and what I read for which ones. But yeah, let's get started. So the first book that I read in the month of December was the Dandy Annual of 2016. So this is obviously Dandy. I enjoyed this one. I think I prefer Beano to Dandy generally, so I gave this one a 3-star. It was fine. I think the Dandy, there isn't as many kind of that I remember from my childhood in this one. I definitely remember kind of the Beano Annual more than this one, but it was interesting, and yeah, like I say, it was a quick read, my first read of the month, and like I say, 3-star. So next up is my second book, which was an ebook, and that is Life and Other Near-Death Experiences by Camille Pagan, I think is how you pronounce the name. So I was literally just sat here thinking about the book and I'd completely forgotten what it was about, which is never, doesn't bode well seeing as I only read it this month. But this one basically follows a woman who goes to the doctor one day because she's not feeling very well and finds out that she has a terminal illness basically, and that she's only got sort of a couple of months to live, and she's really upset about it, obviously. She goes home to tell her husband, and as she's about to tell him, he announces to her that he's leaving her because he is gay. And it kind of is about her dealing with both of those things at once, and she decides to go to like abroad on holiday, and she meets a guy there, and it's kind of about that. I gave this a 3-star. It was a fine contemporary. It was an interesting read, but like I said, it obviously hasn't stuck with me. It was fine. It wasn't like exciting really, and yeah, I definitely wouldn't read anything else, I don't think, from the author. It was like a free book on my Kindle, so yeah, another one read off my Kindle, but not one that I'm super excited about at all. Then the third book that I read was originally a buddy read with my mum, and we were very excited about it. I was going to start Terry Pratchett and read from the beginning, and I started reading The Colour of Magic by Terry Pratchett, which is the first book in the Discworld series, which I've always wanted to read because I've heard great things. My mum is obsessed with Terry Pratchett. Like, honestly, she has read all of his books and loves him, and just, yeah, she was excited for me to read them as well. And I don't even know how much I read, and I DNF'd it because I just could not understand what was happening. I had heard that although it's the first book in the Discworld, it's not the best one to start with. There are other like mini series, so I would like to maybe read the Death trilogy, which sounds really interesting, and maybe some of the others. I have read like the We Free Men and Hatful of Sky, which come towards the end. I think it's like the Tiffany something series, which I enjoyed, so potentially maybe I would try other ones in the series, but yeah, I don't know that I'm going to read them in order because, like I said, I DNF'd this one, unfortunately. So my month didn't start off great, if I'm honest. Then up next, Buddy read a book with the wonderful Linda from Linda's World of Books, and we had a really great time Buddy reading this one. I didn't actually love this book either, which great. We read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, which was one of my TBR books for last year. I've always wanted to read this one for a long time because I read The Lion Game by Ruth Ware and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I wanted to read some more of hers. I've heard some great things, and there are others of hers that I do still want to get to. This basically follows a girl named Lo Blacklock who is invited on a press trip on a cruise ship basically, and it's like a new cruise ship, and she's invited in order to be able to write like a journalist piece, I guess. The first night she witnesses a woman being thrown overboard and hears the screams, and she reports it, obviously very shaken up, and basically she's not believed because there was nobody meant to be staying in the place where she saw it, and there's nobody missing on board. Everybody is like accounted for. So yeah, the reason I didn't love this one, other than the fact, so the pacing of it is very erratic. It's a bit all over the place. Lots and lots of things happen. It's not when I say lots of things happen, what I mean is it's not they're not connected together. It just seems to be very jumpy. None of the characters in this I cared about. I didn't particularly care what was happening, and it has my least favourite trope, which we all know is I hate it when people with mental health illness, like with mental health issues, or previously have had mental health issues, are not believed and they're just ignored because like they're obviously crazy, right? It's literally my least favourite trope, and yes, I hated it for that reason. I did enjoy reading it with Linda. It was a 3-star read, but yes, it frustrated me. Then the next book I read was my first book for the Magical Readathon, and this was for the first week, like week 1, and it was to the prompt that I picked was to read a contemporary novel, and so I went with The Cake Shop in the Garden by Carol Matthews. This was part of my TBR, so I just was going to read it anyway, which was great. So this one I actually really enjoyed. It follows a woman named Faye Merriweather who runs a cake shop from her garden. She sells cakes from her cake shop and has like a little tea garden as well, and that her and her mother, who is housebound, or bedbound even, they live in a garden, but at the end of the garden is like a lock where they have a is it a barge it's called, and yeah, so that was really interesting. She's also a carer for her mother, and then one day another barge turns up in the same canal, or a canal boat probably would make more sense, that's what it is, with a man named Danny Wilde in it, and it's about that. This I really enjoyed. I found it to be it was quite light-hearted at times, but there was some really serious topics in here, and yeah, I really loved it. It was definitely not a 5-star for me, just because there wasn't like that thing that amazed me, but it was really enjoyable, worth the read. And yeah, if you enjoy kind of like chick lit and you enjoy sort of women's fiction, this is definitely a fun one, and yeah, it has some really great romance heavy scenes in this, which I enjoyed. Then in week 2 of Magical Readathon I had 2 prompts, the first of which was to read a graphic novel, comic book or manga, and I was already planning on reading this one. This is the Beano Annual of 2019, so I was like, I'm gonna read this for it, which was great. So this one is like I say, the Beano Annual, the most recent one. And if I'm honest, I gave this one a 2-star. Although I normally prefer Beano to Dandy, I really did not enjoy this one. I just think it was not particularly... So basically, normally in Beano, there's lots of different like comics, and I enjoy that. I enjoy the principle of that. This one had a theme that ran through it, which was, in fact, if I can find it, it was like a spaceship theme. So you'll see here, it was like time travel. So each comic strip had like... I'll show you. Had this kind of the girl coming in from the timeline, and then like each one had the same thing. And I think because they were all linked together, I didn't enjoy it as much, because I found that I really enjoy the different types of like comic strips in this and the different bits of it, and because they were all linked together I just didn't think it was as original and as exciting. So yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of this, I have to say. So it was a 2-star unfortunately, but yes, I did read this one. Next up I read a couple of ebooks that I was reading while I was at work on my break, hence why this is not for the Magical Readathon. I did read the second one for this week a little bit later on, which I'll talk about, but the first one was With Malice by Eileen Cook. This was part of my TBR, and this was also part of one of my TBRs for last year in general. With Malice follows a girl named Jill who wakes up, she's been in a coma for 6 weeks, and she's been in a coma and she can't remember the last 6 weeks, so she thought that she was off to Italy, but actually she'd already been to Italy, been in a car crash, and her best friend Simone had died. Yeah, her best friend Simone had died, and then it turns out that she is now being accused of potentially having done it on purpose, and she has no memory of it, she has amnesia. And so I really did enjoy this one. I did give it a 3-star in the end because there was lots of things in it that I just didn't quite think worked. I enjoyed the premise and I enjoyed some of the bits in it, but the way it was written was not my favourite, and although there was some like multimedia aspects to it, it was very unbelievable at times and it just didn't quite work out for me. So yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but I am glad that I've read it because I've had it on my Kindle for so long. Then I went on to read Perfect Daughter by Amanda Prowse, which I ended up giving a 1-star. So this one I ended up DNFing a little way in, I think, because so basically it followed a woman who at the very beginning of the book is just getting married to her fiance, and so I was very excited when I first started reading it because I thought like, oh, it's going to be like a marriage type, you know, they get married and then they had a baby, and so it was really interesting. And it turned out it was basically they got married and they lived in this particular house, and then she was basically moaning throughout the beginning of the book that they were still living in the same house 15 years later, and how like being married was not like a fun experience, and how she was like she was just being like incredibly ungrateful. And I don't know, I just found the whole thing really annoying, maybe because like right now is not the time for me to be thinking about that, but either way it was just really frustrating, and yeah, I really did not like it, I'm afraid. Next up I read Sleeping Arrangements by Madeline Wickham, who is, so Sophie Kinsella is Madeline Wickham's pen name, so this is her writing under her original name. So this was actually one of my least favourite books of the year, so you'll see it in my worst books of the year video. Basically, I gave this a 2-star. This follows a woman named Chloe who is a wedding dressmaker, and she her husband is basically having trouble at work in that he works for a bank and the bank has just been taken over by another firm, and he is being he's not sure whether he's going to keep his job or not. So they go on holiday to this villa that's been lent to them by one of their friends, and they take their 2 children with them, 2 boys. Then you also follow Hugh, whose wife is like super well polished. She's very much into decorating the house. She's very kind of like overbearing, and the 2 of them take their 2 daughters and a nanny with them, and they also go to the same villa because the same friend has lent them the same villa and he's double booked. There is a kind of secret history, I guess, between the 2 families, and so it's kind of about what happens when they both arrive at the villa and expect that they're staying there. Now, I would have enjoyed this. The premise was great. The build-up where you first meet the characters, was really well done. The characters were really interesting. Some of them you kind of loved and some you hated, and that was just really interesting and really fun. What I hated about this book and what I didn't understand was how unbelievable it is. Now, generally it's a contemporary novel, so it doesn't have the kind of like humour and kind of lightness that Sophie Kinsella's books tend to have, but because it was, meant to be as a different author, I totally understood that. But the fact that it's a contemporary novel, so it's set in the real world, and it's so unbelievable, lots of things were happening, there was connections that would just not have happened between like 2 families, it just didn't make any sense. And on top of that, I think I gave the example in my worst books video, that so one of the sons of one family has a bit of a crush on the nanny of the other family, and basically at one point they also decide everybody sleeps outside in tents, and basically the nanny is smoking weed, and she turns around to the mother of the 16-year-old boy and says, "We're just going to go and have sex over there, so just leave us alone." And I was just like, that would not have happened. Like, that's just not, I don't know. And every time something happened in this, I was just rolling my eyes and I just didn't care, and it really irritated me. So yeah, I will not be reading anything else with Sophie Kinsella writing as Madeline Wickham, because I didn't like this at all. So the second prompt for the second week of the Magical Readathon was to read a book with orange on the cover. So I ended up going with Private Vegas by James Patterson and Maxine Petro. This actually worked out really well for me because this was actually part of my TBR as well, so that was great. This was actually gifted to me by Emily from Novel Novels, so a massive thank you to Emily because I love this one. I had actually read this previously and given it a 2-star, however on on a reread, I gave it a 4-star. So yeah, I'm not sure what changed for me this time, because I can't really remember why I hated it last time or thought I didn't like it very much. So this is book, I don't even know, like 6 of the private series, but you don't have to read them in any order. Basically, the private series follows Jack Morgan, who is the head of private investigations, and he is it's basically a private investigation agency which he runs for the rich and famous. And I will say, although you don't have to read them in order, I personally would, just because having read this one, I think it fits nicely in with the others. I think one of the reasons why I liked this so much though was because I'd read later ones and then gone back to this, and it was very much at home. A lot of the private books are set in different firms, so there's, for example, there's different branches of the private, so there is like private Berlin, there's private London, there's different ones, and this one goes back to the original. So it's Jack Morgan who's the original guy, and it's his, you know, in America. And I really enjoyed this one. Lots and lots of things happen in this one. It was really fun. I don't really want to say too much because I think that you should go into them without reading the kind of the synopsis of them, but like I said, I enjoyed this one much more the second time round, and this was a 4-star this time. Then week 3 of the Magical Readathon, the first prompt I had to read was to read a book where the author's surname started with either a T, an M or an R for Tom Marvolo Riddle. So I ended up deciding to go with this one, mainly because it was a really short one. This is The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner by Stephanie Meyer, so the M. And this is a novella from the Twilight series, so this follows the book Eclipse. So you find out more about what happened to the obviously to Bree Tanner, but the kind of newborn vampires in Eclipse itself. And I enjoyed this one. I gave it a 3-star. I don't think it was anything super special. You definitely don't need to read it if you're reading the Twilight series. I said previously that I'm not going to reread the Twilight series, but I did want to get to this one just because, 1, it was on my shelf and I'd had it a while, and 2, it was just interesting. Initially I couldn't really remember which part of the book this was actually from, but then as you get towards the end, it talks about what happens when like Bella and that are playing baseball, so it's from that moment basically. And yeah, I enjoyed it. Like I said, it was fun. It was a very quick read. I read it in sort of one night. I think it's like 170 pages. So yeah, it was interesting. It's not something I'd ever reread again, and it's definitely a book I'm going to now get rid of. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a 3-star. Then the second prompt for week 3 was to read a book that had a dedication in the front of the book. So I decided to read Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. I was buddy reading this with Nikki from I Read Past My Bedtime anyway, so and it happened to have a dedication at the front. So in the front it says, "Thinking of James M. Cain. They threw me off the hay truck about noon." I don't really know what that means, but that's fine. This is the first book in the, well, I don't know what the name of this trilogy is. I think it's just the, no, I actually don't have a clue what the trilogy is called, but I know it's a trilogy. This one, like I say, is the first one. My mum had previously read this one and actually gave me this book and said that it was really good and I would really like it. I ended up giving this a 3-star. It's definitely one of my least favourite Stephen Kings. I haven't read a lot of like Stephen Kings I've given less than 4 stars, to be honest. So when I say it's a 3-star, I did enjoy it still. It's just not up there with my favourites. This is a kind of crime thriller, I guess. It follows a retired detective named Bill Hodges, who has been tormented by the Mercedes massacre, as it's known, where Brady Hartsfield, who is the perpetrator of that crime, not that obviously the detective knows that at the time, he actually ran a Mercedes into a crowd of people outside of a job fair and killed a load of people, and was never caught basically. And he's now sent letters to Bill Hodges, and he essentially says he's going to kill again. And yeah, it was interesting. It's very, very, like, it's just, there's a lot of writing on each page. It's very small writing, and it's actually like nearly 400 pages, but this took me ages to read. Normally I don't take so long to read a book, but this just seemed to drag on for me. I did enjoy it. Like I said, I don't know that I would call this a thriller as such. This is more of a kind of police procedural, like, crime thing for me. So yeah, I did enjoy it, like I said, but it definitely wasn't my favourite, and I don't even know if I'm going to continue with the series. I might do, because I think I do own the second book, but yeah, I don't know, it's definitely not going to be a priority for me. Then the penultimate book that I read in the month of December was for the fourth week of the Magical Readathon, but I actually cannot remember the reason I picked this book because I can't remember what the prompt was that I had. This is Full Dark No Stars by Stephen King. I ended up reading, obviously I was meant to be reading this one anyway, again for my TBR, so it fit. I genuinely can't remember what the prompt was though, which is annoying. This this follows, like I say, the theme throughout the 4 stories in this is kind of the evil inside you and how everybody has like there's a limit basically for everybody, and I enjoyed the second, third and fourth stories a lot. I wasn't a biggest fan of the first story, like it was fine but it wasn't my favourite. So yeah, it's really interesting. The first story follows I'm just going to have a quick read of this because I can't quite remember. The first story follows, it's called 1922, and it follows a man who kills his wife because she proposes selling off the family farm, and then something happens after that. Then you have the second story, which is called Big Driver, which follows a writer named Tess who is raped on the side of the road on her way back from a book club engagement, and then things go from there. The third story is called Fair Extension, and it follows a man named Harry Streeter who finds out he has terminal cancer, and he makes a deal to extend his life, but there are consequences. And the fourth story, is called A Good Marriage, and this follows a woman named Darcy Anderson who, when her husband is away on a business trip, she finds something in his garage, and again things go from there. It's really interesting. Like I said, the second, third and fourth were much more successful for me. The first story took me ages to read, and although it is a TV like Netflix film, I wasn't the biggest fan of it, if I'm honest. So yeah, but I did enjoy the others, so I would highly recommend. And I gave this one a 4-star. And then the final book that I read in December was actually on New Year's Eve. I read this right at the last minute because I wanted to get this one read, and that is Undead and Unappreciated by Mary Janice Davidson. I read this one for the 5th week of the Magical Readathon, and this was for the prompt of it being on the very top shelf, and this happened to be the one I went for, mainly because it's really short, and I got 3 prompts for that week, and I thought if I don't go for smaller ones I'm definitely not gonna get there. So this is the 4th, no, I always keep saying it's the 4th, this is the 3rd book in the Undead series, and I absolutely love this. This one I gave a 4-star to. I think I've previously given like the first one a 5 and the second book a 4, so it's definitely, the first one is always my favourite, but I really enjoyed this one. It follows a woman named Betsy Taylor, and the first one does, obviously I don't want to say what this one is because this is in a series, but the first book follows Betsy Taylor who works in a shoe shop, and she is killed, and she wakes up as the Queen of the Dead basically. She is a vampire, and not only that, she is, like I said, the Queen of the Vampires, and it's very funny. It's got some very graphic sex scenes in this, so if you don't like that I would not recommend that you pick this up. It's just really funny and really enjoyable, and it's got like a bit of chick lit and a bit of like, I don't know, there's not really gore in it so much, a little bit of like thriller in it too. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot, and yeah, I would highly recommend. I want to continue with the series too because like I said, I enjoyed this one a lot. So there you are guys, that is the 14 books that I read in the month of December. I have to keep remembering which month we're in. So that was up to the end of my year. I hope that you liked this video. Let me know in the comments down below what you read in December and what was your favourite and least favourite. Let me know that because I would be very interested to know. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I shall see you next time for another video. Bye guys!